Hi, I'm Madonna Guy and I'm here with Linda Hoggard, and we've both been naturopaths, kinesiologists for around 20 years each. So we're going to chat about chronic fatigue today because it's something that we both treat heaps, and it's just becoming so prevalent, and there are so many reasons for it. And I think it's getting more complicated these days because the world is more of a mess, pollution-wise and toxin-wise and stress-wise and fight and flight-wise. So what are you finding with people that you chat to these days? What are the driving forces of chronic fatigue?
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about reasons and driving forces, that's a really important place to start, because what's perhaps created one person's chronic fatigue isn't the same.
Yes.
And you might read some sort of classic things about getting your mitochondria functioning, because that's where your energy is made. But the question would be really, what has happened to those pathways to have really jammed them all up so that they're not producing energy? Because ultimately, to get to the bottom of it, you've got to work that out. Is it a post-viral issue that's used up heaps of your CoQ10? And these little, as you know, the energy pathways actually have to be insulated with CoQ10 as well as the role of CoQ10 in the production of energy. So, some people actually nutritionally burn out on their infrastructure of these energy makers.
Because they talk about CoQ10 as being the most important antioxidant for the heart. So going by that, then also one of the most important antioxidants for the muscles. Muscles?
Indeed. Well, I guess it's our muscles, particularly our heart muscle, that has the highest density of mitochondria in it.
Yes. Okay. So mitochondrial dysfunction, the sort of things that clog up those pathways. So like you say, it can be viral drivers, that sort of thing, old infections. What other sort of things have you seen?
Yeah, and I guess just on those viral drivers, for some people it's been quite night and day, their transition into a chronic fatigue syndrome. Like, they were fine until I had this type of virus. Certainly anything that drives inflammation and how those inflammatory chemicals jam up the energy pathways. I talk to my people about almost thinking of their mitochondria like a system of cogs. It's not, it's all a whole lot of chemistry, but what's actually jamming up that cog so that for the units of fuel coming in, that they're not getting the output of energy.
Right.
And so sometimes that's just pure nutritional deficiency, where there's not enough B vitamins and magnesium to go to start pulling the hydrogen off the fuel pathways. And then I guess sometimes, like, as you know, I'm quite a fan of Dr. Sarah Myhill, which is a great website blog for people to look at.
That's from the UK, isn't it?
So she has a clinic in the UK, does a lot to do with energy recycling. So we pretty much make our body weight a day in ATP, which is our unit of energy, but of course we don't actually have to make that amount. It's getting recycling, and there's some critical nutrients like d-ribose and creatine that have that recycling, and that we know, and certainly in some families that have poor energy function, that often runs in the female line, that they just have hereditary issues around these d-ribose pathways bringing the ATP back together. And of course that's something that people can supplement. Yes.
Okay. So are these the sort of things, doctors can't test for d-ribose deficiency, can they?
I doubt that they might even know what d-ribose is.
Yeah. Because I suppose that's one of the things that I'm sure you get asked all the time is as well, why hasn't my doctor done tests and found the cause of my chronic fatigue? But even if you get a virus, your doctor has to be very specific with what he's actually checking for with the blood tests. If they don't check for the virus that you've got, they're not going to find it. So it takes time to find these underlying drivers and causes.
So I guess sometimes we would find the answers with questions. So one question I would always ask is, what's your sort of rebound fatigue like? Have you sort of found a level of energy that's okay, but as soon as you overdo it, that your energy doesn't come back for 3 days? That's a real indicator that you're not recycling your energy pathways.
Right. Okay.
As opposed to, I guess people come in varying levels, don't they? Sometimes they come in wheelchairs and they've just been bedridden.
And some people have already spent 5-10 years trying to find a solution, so they've already started taking really good nutrients in the background, like their B complexes and magnesiums and n-acetyl carnitines and things like that. So once again, underneath, I suppose, looking through the family line to see where there are deficiencies, you know, because even if you haven't got something going on with you that's showing up in a blood test, if there's a genetic issue in the family, like, say, let's talk about cholesterol for a sec, just for fun.
Yes.
So as naturopaths, we believe cholesterol's a good thing. It's your friend.
The building blocks
yes.
of all your hormones and your cell walls and totally necessary.
Oh, it's, yes. Yeah. So the whole thing where people start getting raised cholesterol, one of the things, I think going back 3 or 4 years ago, the 2 highest prescribed drugs were antidepressants and cholesterol drugs. Because cholesterol is part of the building blocks of making hormones, if your hormones are crashing regularly, quite often you have higher levels of cholesterol because your body's trying to give you the building blocks to make more hormones.
And hence also, I guess, the building blocks of your stress hormones. And of course, the stress hormones are inducers of the enzymes that produce cholesterol and CoQ10.
Yeah, cholesterol, love it. Oh, anyway, and then the brain is, you know, what, 60% cholesterol or something like that. It's a huge, it's important. It's important. So when we're looking at drivers, once again, if you're not getting enough good fats and proteins in your diet, you're not going to be able to be creating, you know, and good quality things. You're not going to be able to creating your antibodies to fight infections. You're not going to be able to be making your hormones to help you get through the days. So once again, building blocks are really important. And
I think so. I always say to people, it's like gardening.
Yes.
You know, if your soil's really bad and you haven't got the right kind of microbes and earthworms in your soil and nutrition, you end up with like really crappy vegetables, and then those vegetables are really susceptible to disease or attack. And we're exactly the same. So I guess that's that beauty of naturopathy, of giving the body those building blocks of what it needs so it can turn around. And I guess, of course, once someone's gone into something like chronic fatigue, our role is to really try and specify what the building blocks are for that person. But I guess also there's a huge understanding now around detoxification and perhaps methylation pathways, and that some people aren't fully activating their folates and how that affects their B12 folate ratios. And of course, you know, you get very specific types of fatigue syndromes with massive B12 deficiencies.
And once, because I've got lots of clients now who have found that they've got the MTHFR defects in their genes, and then they've gone back through their history when they've actually started looking at the types of problems and going, oh, this is the reason for my miscarriages, or this is the reason for, you know, and then, I mean, in hindsight, if you had known 15 years ago, then that's one thing, but you don't know until you know. And then you can start moving forwards.
Yes, for sure. And I guess I think you know, my history, that I definitely went into the lines of becoming a naturopath rather than a GP because of my own hormonal issues. And essentially what I've learned about the MTHFR genes and my real issue with not having enough methylfolate, and to be able to supplement that now, and a whole lot of things that I guess I've been helping with, perhaps herbal medicine for years, has actually, if I supplement that and support the methylation pathways, just a whole lot of stuff disappears, because ultimately in functional medicine we're learning now what's happening right back more at the genetic level. And I always say to people, it's a bit like sometimes your body's lost the recipe, sometimes it's lost the ingredients.
Right.
So it's interesting, you know, we can give the ingredients, we might recognise that also that the body doesn't necessarily know what to do with that, so the ingredient has to be quite specific.
Right. And so I suppose there's the nutrients that add to the body's health, but then there's also the things we're doing in our diets and lifestyles that are taking away from our energy pathways, and people aren't even aware they're doing it. You know.
And I think along the lines of methylation is just the lack of green vegetables that people are eating. Yes, there's some wonderful supplementation, but a lot can be done by just also really increasing the amount of green vegetables that.
And it's so simple. There are so many studies that look at people, say, post-cancer, where you're adding in 1 cupful of broccoli a day and it adds X amount of months to people's lives. So it's not that hard, and it's not that complicated.
The think it's about consistently making kind of good choices. Like, sure,
Yes.
we just went out for lunch. Would have been great to sort of have a sandwich, but essentially what I know about my body, it works really well on consistent supply of protein and lots of vegetables.
Yes.
You know, so hence had fish and, 3 choices of salad and vegetable to go with it.
And a peppermint tea.
And a peppermint tea. So, yeah, because I think I often talk to people about really making food choices based on feeding your body rather than filling it.
Yes.
And I see consistently that people tend to make really good choices around dinner, where they'll choose a good quality protein, salads, veggies, that sort of thing.
Yes.
But it's the choices that they're making for breakfast and lunch, and those choices tend to be more filler based, and so what they're doing is those fillers are probably quite inflammatory.
Yes.
And they're certainly not providing the nutrition that could be provided by making better choices.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find as well, people might go, say wheat, for example, so good old celiac disease. People might go along to their doctor and it comes back negative for celiac, so then they go, oh, gee, I can have wheat or gluten. But I think what's been found is that because most of our wheat has been genetically modified, certainly there's been 2 major times of GMOing our wheat over the last century, that most people it's a minor toxin. With some people it's a major toxin, but for just about everyone there's certainly a minor toxic level every time we have gluten in the body, and it tends to destroy the villi in the intestines, and then our body has to recreate those. So it's almost like we're all living on a bit of a knife edge with what we're getting away with until we don't get away with it anymore.
Yeah, it's like I always talk to people about the seesaw kind of tips.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like, and particularly when you're younger, I think your age gets you on a better sort of seesaw, and then it's like, I get into my 20s, my 30s, and then that seesaw starts to tip.
Yeah.
And, I often say to people when I'm giving them a plan about how to turn them around on that road that they're on, is that, we're going to do, like, improve your lifestyle so that you're not sort of so stressed, work on that, work on the food, do some specific supplementation so that you can get that seesaw to come back, because it's not always just one thing.
No. One of my clients in the last few weeks, actually, she cut out, the 2 big things I asked her to do was cutting out gluten and dairy, which of course she didn't think she could eat anything ever again. So, which is a common complaint. So I gave her a few handouts with lots of things, and I didn't keep it any more complicated than that, just gluten-free, dairy-free. And she lost 10 kilos in the first, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that, and was feeling really, really good. And it's interesting watching because she hasn't been able to take supplements because her body is so sensitive. Anytime
inflamed.
So inflamed. Anytime she adds anything in, even a probiotic, she gets major side effects. So she's terrified of medical drugs, she's terrified of supplements, and we just have to keep on, moving really slowly for her. And what was interesting is that the amount of symptoms just taking the gluten and the dairy out without supplementation at this point, what a difference it's made in her life to her weight and her joints and her energy. And
well, absolutely, it's the great universal mimicker, isn't it? Can potentially be creating kind of all problems if that's the issue. And I think that, when you're looking at losing that much physical weight so quickly, a lot of it's going to be fluid and fluid retention from elevated inflammation. And most of our inflammation comes from our gut.
And it was interesting when we did we did a complete thyroid test. Her doctor even said to her, I don't know how to read this, take it back to your naturopath, which is cool. And so her TSH, which has been checked like 15 times over the last 10 years because of her weight and her tiredness, it's always perfect. She's in her 70s and it was like 2.4, so a doctor wouldn't even look twice at that. But the reverse T3 was high, and her conversion of T4 to T3 isn't great. And when we're inflamed, I think there's something like 20% of us have the inability genetically to convert T4 to T3. So that's 20% of us.
Yeah, and do you remember, I think Jeffrey Bland talking about how NF-kappa B, which is like, the grandfather of inflammatory kind of feedback mechanisms, that where it likes to dock in the DNA is also where the thyroid hormone docks. So hence you can get these sort of subclinical thyroid conditions that don't show up on a test, but it's all being interfered with because of the role of inflammation. And that cascading of inflammation just starting and not stopping and going on and on.
And I think it always seems too complicated for people when we start going organic and pesticide free and that sort of thing. And I always say to people, do the best you can. Do the best you can with your budget. These are the clean, these are the cleaner foods. These are the 15 to watch, so that are the worst with pesticides, so that you're reducing the ones that are have the most toxins, you're increasing the ones that you can buy the cleanest and most cheaply. And even places like Woolies these days have quite a variety of organic and free-range stuff.
Unfortunately, not in New Zealand, but maybe in Auckland, but certainly not in rural New Zealand.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's really good these days, so it is something that is definitely growing. And even I've got some clients who are autoimmune paleo, very, very sensitive, and they do a lot of their shops, you know, trying to get the prices a bit cheaper, you know.
So I think, like, it's often about what's the next step for a person, isn't it?
Yes.
And a next step for a person might be that actually, if you're just going to eat bread 3 times a day, you're going to end up feeling like a loaf of bread, or, you know, stodgy and heavy potentially. And so their next
you are what you eat.
Yeah, the next step will not be going kind of paleo, organic or something, but actually getting food, less filler, into their body.
And that's what I often, exactly. Instead of saying you can't have this, say, well, how about an omelette for breakfast? You know, how about, how about even like a gluten-free wrap for lunch? You know, so just starting to change things around slowly so that it's more manageable and more doable. What did you do in it? Did you jump in holus bolus when you went gluten-free? Like, how do you...
I think for myself, when I first started at naturopathic college, and we were talking about symptoms of an inflamed bowel and mucus and things, and I could relate to a lot of that. And my teacher at the time kind of went, wow, I think you really need to go dairy and wheat-free. And it changed my life. I think at that time it would be common for me to have a sinus infection every month, you know, really struggle with my bowels, etc. So it was life-changing.
That's right. You had lots of golden seal in your herbs.
But it wasn't until maybe 8 years down the track, I was actually doing one of Bernard Jensen's big sort of bowel cleanse, and it kind of just really hit me. It's like, actually, I'm profoundly gluten intolerant, because I'd really continued to struggle with anemia. I can remember being a really busy naturopath, kind of booked out weeks ahead, and having spontaneous blood noses, because I would have thought, I've just supplemented iron for 6 months and I must be fine. But of course, with all the still chronic inflammation in my gut, I wasn't getting the iron absorption. And then, but it had been enough of a shift, you know, that you think, you know, I've sorted a heap of it out. And I must have just been feeding my gluten intolerance enough. Because I know when I went totally gluten-free from that time onwards, you know, I had real withdrawals for about 6 weeks. Like I remember sitting in a car and there was a pizza guy, you know, and I nearly attacked him. And I must have just been feeding for me that addiction that happens with the opiate receptors when you're not digesting gluten properly.
Yeah, so they talk about gliadin and opioids and that sort of thing.
Right.
So it
Gliadin-morphine.
Yeah, so I think it takes a good... about 9 months I had heard to get those off the gut wall so that your body isn't, like it's a mess, you know, in the gut when we've had them for a long time. And so many people are just addicted. They're full on addicted. They don't even notice they're addicted to.
Yeah, and you certainly can tell the addiction when you start to mention that maybe this is the driver of their chronic fatigue or something.
And the anger and fight and flight comes through.
Like, I'm an addict, lady.
Okay, so drivers then, so mitochondrial dysfunction, obviously toxicity within the cells. When we're adding in things into...
Yes? Was that heavy metals, mercury?
Yeah.
You know, how mercury takes the position of magnesium in the energy pathway.
Yeah.
And I always like that analogy that, you know, when you're making energy, there's energy there, and it's like the archer pulling out the bow, and at this point here, where there's all that potential energy, that's one of the roles of magnesium, is to have that energy there so it can be released when we need it. And then, of course, mercury can take that place because of the size, I guess, of the elements. And then you just get that where you just can't release your energy.
Stem cells are involved in energy production?
I guess stem cells are involved in the renewal and the repair of the body, and I've certainly, in my observation, particularly when people have been in a fatigue state for quite a long time, that by increasing their renewal and repair, that you also get new cells coming out that have fresh mitochondrial information. And of course, we know that for a lot of fatigue states that there's a lot of mitochondrial, like actually not enough energy organelles, I was going to call them, the little mitochondria in the heart muscle, particularly in the thigh muscle as well. So hence the fatigue people get in their legs, and then they're just poor ability to exercise.
I was thinking there was, at a seminar a couple of years ago, they were talking about glucose intolerance, where when we eat something that turns into sugar in the blood and we end up with our raised levels of glucose, the pancreas is of course supposed to release insulin to go bind with the glucose, get it into the cells and spit out energy at the other end.
Yep.
Basically. But what seems to be happening with a lot of people, because we're so carbohydrate oriented with our diets these days, is that the pancreas gets lazy. It doesn't release the insulin. So then the glucose is inflammatory as it's floating around the bloodstream.
Very, very damaging.
So then your liver releases cholesterol to bind with the glucose. So that ends up, so we're talking about that glugginess on the inside of the mitochondria. So I've had this suspicion whether or not that the cholesterol bound glucose is in the cells jamming up the cogs in the background as well. So it was sort of because that's not designed to make our ATP.
No.
So anyway, it was just a thought.
Yeah, and definitely something that wouldn't have happened in a hunter-gatherer time.
No.
Yeah, people just, those biochemical pathways that kind of kick in these sloppy modern ways of eating wasn't relevant. Not that long ago. Yeah, and I think
probably one thing to possibly manage is water. You know, so people sort of come in and they say, yep, I'm drinking my 2 litres of water a day, straight out of the tap.
Yeah, the quality of the water.
The quality of the water. People, you've got to purify your water.
Yeah, particularly, and particularly if you've got issues with B12, that chlorine is just going to keep wiping out your B12 levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you look at like Ben Lynch's lists of what to really sort out in your life, if you're a poor methylator, is chlorine's number one. Yeah, getting it out of your shower and out of your water supply.
And one of the things that I've noticed, I've had a couple of people mention this over the years, when they have had a shower and they start feeling faint and woozy, the chlorine can turn into almost like a chloroform in the brain.
Well, you go into a chlorine gas. Yeah. And I think the statistics are something like if in a 10-minute hot shower you absorb 200 times the amount of chlorine than you meant to, because of course it's a halide and it goes into a gas. Yeah, and I know certainly for myself I really struggle with that. Not in my own home, because lucky to be.
You purify your water.
But it's all on rainwater and bore water. Yeah, but I certainly notice it as I venture out into the world. So it's something to really think about, getting that water purified as well. So we paid for a whole house water purifier this year. And when I was living in town supply, I had a whole house. Yeah. Just a basic chlorine purifier cartridge can only cost maybe a couple $100 a year to add on to your house. Yeah. I know yours is like extra super fancy. Yep. Yeah, but even for my chronic fatigue patients, I'll start looking at just getting a basic chlorine filter on the inlet coming into the house. Yeah.
So I know it's hard to do, but if you were to think of your top 5 things you would recommend for someone with chronic fatigue?
Oh, magnesium. Actually, and I think I was at a seminar last year and the presenter said, who needs magnesium? And quite a few just went, everyone. I don't think I've got a patient who's not on magnesium. Yeah. Of course, it affects 380 different pathways and extremely important in how we make energy and how we sleep as well, because that's a big part. So magnesium, B vitamins, CoQ10, I guess they're the real basics, and that's when the rest of it you might start going into what's the driver of it. So if someone would appear just to have an annihilated immune system and things, then you'd be looking at your zinc, Siberian ginseng, and that sort of thing for rebuilding.
The gut health for...
and then, as you know, when I work, we do heaps of gut stuff.
We do.
Yeah, and of course 80% of your immune system's around your gut. It's the big driver of inflammation. Yeah. Yeah, and then of course if there's a big toxicity issue, using the clinoptenolite products, of which there's a few options these days that are safe, and
make sure you get a cleansed one.
Make sure you get a cleansed one. Yeah, and using that to sort of start bypassing the detoxification pathway, so that there's an independent ability to sort of bind these things.
When was that? We've discovered that maybe 13, 14 years ago or something like that. It quite changed the way that we worked with our clients, because it did so much stuff that other things just didn't do. It was really interesting.
And for a person who's really prone to becoming heavy metal toxic, there's often genetic glitches in their ability to make glutathione and metallothioneins and that sort of thing. So yes, you can use supplementation to make those pathways work properly, but sometimes they're just a bit dysfunctional, and then this is a way to sort of bypass that and independently grab the toxicity, and when it's grabbed, that it's also safe to be taken out through the kidneys or the bile.
And I think the gut, you know, for some people whose gut has been dysfunctional over years because of lots of antibiotic use or things like that, you know, the poor old gut bugs aren't in the best of health.
Yes.
So probiotics, the better your probiotic levels are in the gut, you can actually, they can bind with the heavy metals and get them out of the system.
And of course, some of the fuel that our body, our mitochondria uses, are direct byproducts of our bacteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that has been fantastic. Hope that's helpful, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Cheers.
Bye.